The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, welcome everybody to the Yaron Brook Show. It's been a while. Wow, I think that was the longest break I've taken from doing the show, maybe ever. A lot of things conspired to do it that way. One is I've been traveling, and I find, maybe I'm just getting old, I find that I have less energy lately to do these shows from the road in the evening and get it all lined up, technical problems and things like that. So while I thought I would do a few shows from the road, it never really worked out, including when I was in California. I thought I'd be able to do it from my home in California, but it turned out that just stacked up busy every single day and never got to do it. And then when I came back to Puerto Rico, like a week ago, I was just exhausted and couldn't pull off a show. Exhausted, wasn't feeling well. Decided to kind of rest so that I could get my immune system back up so that I could go back on the road this last week. And of course, now I'm back and I'm Tuesday, leave again for Europe. So anyway, from Europe, I will definitely try to do some shows from London. It's I'm staying at my usual hotel in London where I have a setup, wired internet setup where I can usually get a show done. So should be fun. All right, today we're going to do, I think the thing you're probably most waiting for is to discuss the coronavirus. By the way, no relationship to the beer. The coronavirus and what's going on. And I've got an expert coming on because I don't know that much about it. And we're going to have Dr. Amesh Adalja, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name. I always do. I've had him on the show a few times. But Amesh will be on. He was just on Fox. So he is literally driving home so he can open up his computer and set it up and do the show from his computer. So as soon as he gets there, he will sign on Zoom, and we'll hook him in and get a discussion of the coronavirus with him. Probably around 3:30 Eastern time, so in about half an hour we'll have him on. Maybe a few minutes later than that, whenever he gets up and gets set and gets organized. I also want to talk about today. Maybe quickly, there's a lot probably that can be discussed here, is Trump's peace plan for the Middle East. They always say the Middle East, but it's the Israeli-Palestinian peace plan. We can talk about that. You can, if you're interested, you can find the peace plan on whitehouse.gov. It's a really pretty, internet page that they've created for the plan. You can read it quickly. It's a pretty quick, easy read. And we'll talk about that. I also want to finally give you my review of both the Joker and Witcher. This is the advantage of me traveling a lot, is I get to watch a lot of video on flights. And so I did finally watch Joker, and I did watch Witcher. So we can talk about both of those later today. And then Jacob he's asking for classical music recommendation for meditations earlier mentioned. I'm not sure what he means by that, but we can certainly talk about classical music and some recommendations around that. And if Jacob wants to be more specific about what he means, I can give advice about that. All right, so let's start with the MiddleEast plan. As you probably know, the White House, I think, has put out their long-awaited peace plan for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's a peace plan put together really by Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, and it came out. I don't think it was really, they didn't trumpet it as much as one would expect, I think, to a large extent, because they realized that in many respects, the peace plan is a non-starter. There's nobody really to negotiate this with. So it's kind of out there. It's being discussed. There have been some press conferences with both Benjamin Netanyahu and the guy running against Netanyahu, Getz, the former general. They've been, they were both in the White House when this was unveiled. They both have expressed, some support for the plan, which is pretty easy for them to do, given that it's going nowhere. So let's talk a little bit about this plan. I mean, I've talked about it in the past. I had a sense of what the outline would be in the past. I don't think it was a big secret. And let's start maybe with a few of the positives regarding the peace plan, the Middle East peace plan unveiled by Trump. First, it's as compared to peace plans put together by Carter, even Reagan, Clinton, Bush, certainly Obama, although Obama never had a formal peace plan. It's the most pro-Israel plan. It's a plan that seems to definitely take seriously Israel's security concerns to a point. I would argue that the plan itself contradicts the idea of Israel's security, but it gives a lot of lip service to it. It emphasizes that as a big aspect of the plan. It's clearly geared towards getting support, from the Israelis, and it has. And it's geared towards getting support from kind of the pro-Israel lobby in Washington, which I think it has as well. At least the kind of the right of center pro-Israel lobby in Washington, D.C. The plan does kind of place the responsibility for peace to some extent on the Palestinians, but not enough. But it is somewhat considered by many to be pro-Israel. It does articulate the case for a two-state solution for the establishment of a Palestinian state. It actually mentions, the idea of Palestinian state 1,397 times. So 1,397 times in a 180-page document, it says the state of Palestine. So it is recognized. It's a peace plan that recognizes and endorses the formation of a Palestinian state in territory, both, if you know a little bit about the map of Israel, both in the West Bank and Gaza, but also in some territory controlled today by Israel, and some of the West Bank is then given to Israel. So there's like a trade of land where Israel gives up some land and the Palestinians give up some land. It involves no dismantling of settlements, no movement of populations, either Palestinians or Israelis. But it is a full-fledged endorsement of a state of Palestine, a Palestinian state, which, George Bush was the first American president to endorse such a plan for a Palestinian state, and it's become basically the American foreign policy to do so. So that's everything I think good with the plan. It basically tilts a little bit, tilts a little bit towards towards Israel. But in everything else, it is a terrible plan. It is a horrible plan. It does not recognize the fundamental reality of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It evades that. It's a non-starter. It can't go anywhere because it gives way too much credit to the Palestinians. It basically suggests that the Palestinians, in order to achieve peace, just need the right plan. That the Palestinians want peace, that the Palestinian leadership, the Palestinian people, the Palestinian political parties, want peace, and that the only barrier to achieving that peace is having the right plan, is maybe providing them with the right incentives. I think all of that is bogus. I think all of that is fundamentally wrong. The first and biggest problem with the Trump administration's peace plan is that there is a peace plan. The American administration should butt out. They shouldn't offer any peace plans. Let the Israelis and the Palestinians come to terms on their own terms. The United States cannot impose a peace plan that is lasting, that is successful on the Middle East. It was not, the peace between Israel and Egypt was not a product of the United States. The peace between Israel and Egypt was a product of the courage, the foresight of Sadat, Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt at the time. He unilaterally declared his willingness to engage in peace negotiations with Israel. He flew to Jerusalem. He spoke in front of the Knesset. And then he negotiated. The Americans helped a little bit, brought everybody to neutral territory, crossed the T's, dotted the I's, but it was not an American peace plan. It is a peace plan negotiated between the two parties at the initiative of, I think, the party that had to engage in that initiative, the Arab states that had initiated war against Israel and have been initiating war against Israel since the beginning of the state of Israel, or even really from well before that, since the idea of a state of Israel came into being. America should just butt out. And it should butt out more generally. I mean, many of you will say, oh, but you support the Americans supporting Israel. I don't. I don't support America supporting Israel financially. I support the United States supporting Israel in the only thing that really is meaningful. That is supporting it morally, supporting its right to exist, its right to self-defense, and supporting the idea that Israel is the moral, just party in this conflict. And for that, I encourage you to read Ilan Journo's book about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, available at Amazon, available everybody else. It's a book that'll give you a sense of why I and others think Israel is the just party, why Israel is should receive moral support, why Israel should not be twisted into some kind of deal with the Palestinians. So the peace plan first is they'll concede because there shouldn't be a peace plan. The only thing the United States could do to help Israel, I mean, two things it could do. One is to assert the justice of Israel's cause and basically tell them it's up to them and how they deal with the situation and leave it up to Israel to do it. Secondly, as part of that moral support, they could convey a clear message to the Palestinians. And the message that the Palestinians should receive is that they are wrong, that they are in the wrong, that if they want peace, they must negotiate with Israel directly. But they have to realize that the United States will not come to their assistance, will not come to their aid, will not give them money, will not support them until they change their ways dramatically. It won't support them anyway, but it won't support them morally until they dramatically change their ways. The message that the Palestinians should receive is that they have no hope other than peace, that their cause is not just, that their cause is not moral, and that their cause will not receive support from a civilized world. And that their cause should be a cause of despair, of failure, and that they better get their act together, better go to the Israelis with some deal that is acceptable to Israel. I mean, Israelis suffer from the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. They suffer a lot. But the Palestinians suffer dramatically more. And, somebody once said, and I think, this is a catch it. It's kind of a silly thing. But the fact is that if tomorrow Israel lay down its weapons, the Palestinians would slaughter them. If tomorrow the Palestinians lay down their weapons, there would actually be peace in the Middle East. So the responsibility for the initiative towards peace has to come from the Palestinians, not from the US, not even from the Israelis. It has to come from the Palestinians. And it can only come from the Palestinians if they recognize, internalize completely that they have lost, that they have no hope, and that Israel is the solution to their problems, not the cause of their problems. That the only way for them to thrive and succeed is by reaching a deal with the Israelis. And that deal could be a one-state solution. It could be some form of two-state solutions. You know, who knows what the deal will be. And I don't think anybody should pretend to assert what it should be into the future. It's a deal that's going to take a long time, and it's a deal that has to come from the Palestinians and has to come at their initiative. Now, what does the Trump deal do beyond recognize that the Palestinians should have their own state? The primary section, the primary verbiage in this deal is focused on economics. And this is a long-standing fallacy that claims that the Palestinian conflict is fundamentally a conflict that is driven by economics. That if only the Palestinians were rich, if only the Palestinians thought that a peace deal would make them economically successful, then they would lay down their weapons and they would shake hands with the Israelis and they would all become best friends. But there is zero basis for that idea. And yet that is the assumption behind the Trump peace plan. I mean, here's one sentence. If implemented, peace to prosperity will empower the Palestinian people to build that society that they have aspired to establish for generations. But is that true? Have Palestinians aspired to establish a society that is prosperous, free, successful? Somebody's already complaining about what I say about Trump. I haven't said anything about Trump. I'm analyzing the plan. So, has the Palestinians aspired to this kind of freedom? Have they aspired to a marketplace? Have they aspired to economic prosperity? Because if they had aspired to all those things, then why, when the Gaza Strip was handed to them by the Israelis, did they destroy all the economic infrastructure that the Israelis had left behind? Why, when they had autonomy and were pretty much left alone, did they not establish a free government with free institutions? Why did I not establish a prosperous trading economic system based on private property? Where was any of that? Where's that in the Gaza Strip? Where's that in the West Bank? Indeed, the Palestinians were most prosperous before the first Intifada in 1987, when they were under Israeli rule, where they were integrated into the Israeli economy, and they did relatively well. And yet that is what they rejected. And when they had relative autonomy in the post-1994 kind of post-Oslo Accord era, post-1993, they destroyed that prosperity. They didn't take advantage of it. Indeed, the corruption of the Palestinian leadership destroyed any possibility of prosperity for the Palestinians. They could have been prosperous. What prevented them from that prosperity is their own leadership. Did they reject that leadership as a consequence? No, they keep electing the same and choosing the same people to lead them throughout. So the Palestinians have nobody to blame for their plight but themselves. From 1947 on, they've rejected any possibility of peace with the Israelis. When they've come close to some kind of settlement with the Israelis, come close to any kind of autonomy over their own land, they're proven to be incapable and incompetent of actually creating a even semi-free society that leads to prosperity. And yet, Trump's peace plan assumes that they've aspired to prosperity and to freedom and to having a wonderful world. The plan promises to usher Palestinians into a, quote, prosperous future, unquote, and it says that they will be helped by over 50 billion of new investment over 10 years, including significant American investment. It's, the goal is to cause the Palestinian GDP to double in 10 years, create over 1 million new jobs, reduce the unemployment rate below 10%, reduce poverty rate by 50%. They talk about electricity all over the place. 116 times they have electricity mentioned in the plan. 303 times they have prosperity mentioned in the plan. By the way, Daniel Pipes has a good review of the plan at danielpipes.org. Pipes is very good in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They talk about developing tourism and Israel giving, they're building tunnels and roads and Israel maintaining the security responsibility over all these things, but as if all that's needed for the Palestinians to change their ways and abandon terrorism and abandon the idea of destroying Israel, all that's needed is a few roads and a tunnel and a resort and a casino maybe and a better electricity grid. Maybe we can bring that electricity grid to Puerto Rico where we need it. I mean, I don't understand the reason for putting out this plan, other than as a way to try to get kind of secure certain parts of the Jewish vote during the election. It's not going to go anywhere. The Palestinians have already turned it down. It gives them nothing new. We know the Palestinians are not interested in peace. If they were, again, they could quite capable of contacting the Israelis and negotiating a deal. But they have done no such thing. They have not been interested. They have, when they did strike a deal in 1993 in Oslo, they used that deal as justification and as leverage to attack Israel more and more, and terrorism rose every time Israel negotiates, every time Israel compromises with the Palestinians. Terrorism increases. It is only through strength that Israel can achieve peace with the Palestinians. And that peace has to come from the Palestinians and from the acceptance of their complete and utter defeat. Their acceptance that they will not, cannot get rid of Israel militarily through violence, through terrorism, and that their complete acceptance of the existence of the state of Israel. That is the only way peace will come to the Middle East. And that requires a different approach from America. It ultimately requires a different approach from Israel, but that is a whole other issue that we can talk about at some point. Somebody's asking, has there ever been a nation state called Palestine? Historically, Palestine refers to a region, not a country. A Palestinian is nothing more than a collection of Jordanians and Egyptians and Saudis. Well, there's never been such a nation state as Jordan. Indeed, really, there's never been nation states in the Middle East. The Middle East has been occupied by a variety of different empires that have ruled over it in a variety of different periods, the latest being the Ottoman Empire. It is only after World War I that the concept and idea of a nation state, came to the Middle East as a dominant idea. There's no such thing as a Jordanian. There's no such thing as a Saudi. I mean, Saudi Arabia is named after the royal family that happened to have conquered a particular area in the peninsula, in the Arabian Peninsula, and they called the state after the name of the Saud family. If a different family had conquered it, it would be a different state. There's no Iraq. There's never been an Iraq. There's no Syria. There's no real Lebanon. Now, Syria, to some extent, that term existed because for a long time, I think under the Romans and later on under Ottomans, it was an area that included Jordan and Israel and much of that part of the world. And in Damascus, usually the regional governor ruled from. So the whole concept of a nation state is a European concept. It doesn't exist anywhere else. And it has been exported to the rest of the world. It's a concept that comes out of the Westphalian, agreements, and really came to dominate Europe in the 19th century with the rise of nationalism and nationalist movements. So, is there such a thing as a Palestinian people? What? Yes, as much as there is such a thing as the Jordanian people. It's people who live in a particular geographic area. Now, historically, many of the Arabs who live in what is today Israel, plus the West Bank and Gaza, many of them came from Syria and Lebanon, Jordan, and other places during the era in which the Jews, when they came to what was then called Palestine under the British, created a huge amount of economic activity, and many of these Arabs came in and bought property and raised families and worked there. But that, in my mind, is as legitimate as if somebody lived there for 2,000 years. Who the hell cares how long you've lived somewhere? So again, I'm not a nationalist in that sense. So yes, there's such a thing as Palestinians, the same extent that there is such a thing as anything else. They're Arabs who lived in what we have geographically defined as Palestine. And the Palestinian national movement came out, was created. Hi, Amesh. Give me 2 minutes to finish up here and we'll go. Can you hear me? Say something?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Let me just finish up this up quickly and then we'll go to you. So it came out of the same intellectual stream that brought nationalism, brought the whole idea of a nation state into the Middle East in the kind of post-World War I world, in the post-World War war. Okay, let me just see if there's other questions here related to this particular issue. Did Kant's influence ever reach Islam in the Middle East? Yes, it did. I don't know how directly it did, but it did, again, in the kind of late 19th century and certainly in the post-World War I, in the secular parts of the Middle East, where primarily rich Arabs sent their kids to go study at the best universities in the world, and those universities happened to be in Europe, and they learned, just like everybody else who went to Europe at the time, Kantian ideas, or at least Kantian influenced ideas. So yes, the Kantian ideas, but also ideas around socialism and fascism. All those ideas were imported into the Middle East by students who went to the West, learned those ideas, and brought them back to the Middle East. Finally, Palestinians are oppressed and manipulated by Hamas. Yeah, but Hamas is the Palestinians, right? In an election, I forget the year now, quite a bit of time ago, the Palestinians elected Hamas as their major political party, and as a consequence, they elected Hamas. Hamas was voted in democratically. So you can't separate Hamas from the Palestinians. And of course, they could get rid of Hamas if they really chose to. There could be a revolution. So you can't claim there's Hamas and they're responsible for XYZ, and then there's the Palestinian people. It's very much intermingled. Hamas is part of a long line of Palestinian leadership that has failed the Palestinian in significant, dramatic ways. And it's sad and tragic that the Palestinian people have had leaders that have completely abused them, failed them, and not provided them with any kind of realistic approach to their situation and their condition. And of course, the Palestinian people have not demanded it, so you don't get scot-free. To a large extent, the leaders you have, you are responsible for. All right, hey, Amesh, how are you?
Good.
Running around. Thanks for doing this. I know how busy you are.
Sure.
So let me quickly give kind of your bio. So tell me again how you pronounce your family name.
Adalja.
So Amesh Adalja is an MD. He's a senior scholar at Johns Hopkins University Center for Health Security. He is focused on emerging infectious disease, pandemic preparedness, and biosecurity. I mean, you can read his bio at the Center for Health Security.org. Just put Amesh Adalja in the internet and you'll get a ton of stuff. He comments on issues related to infectious disease on Fox and many other news outlets. He publishes quite a bit and works at the major hospitals. Is still affiliated with the medical school at the University of Pittsburgh. Yes, yeah. School of Medicine. And so I'm not going to read the whole bio, but it's extensive. So I cannot think of anybody, in a better position to talk about what's going on with the coronavirus than Amesh. So thanks again for joining us.
Sure.
So maybe let's start at the beginning. Where did this virus come from, and kind of how was it discovered?
So this virus appeared in late in December, and it started in a cluster of patients that had been to a seafood market in Wuhan, and they had unexplained pneumonia, and they were tested for the usual suspects, and everything came out negative. And because of the history of SARS, which we can get into, they're very aggressive in China with trying to explain undefined pneumonias. And what they found was a novel coronavirus. And coronaviruses are viruses that we've known for quite a long time. There are 4 of them that circulate and cause the common cold. And then there are 2 that are really severe, SARS and MERS. And they found a novel coronavirus, and that set off a lot of alarm bells because people thought, could this be the next SARS? And based on the experience that China had with SARS in 2003, where they covered up cases, where there was an outbreak that kind of went undetected and really surprised the world and then spread around the world and caused 8,000 cases and 800 deaths and led to tens of billions of dollars of economic losses, China got very aggressive and really started to clamp down on this outbreak and be very aggressive with their measures there. And now we've seen cases that have appeared in other countries. We've seen travel bans initiated. But one thing that's important to remember is that coronaviruses cause a spectrum of illness. And when you start an outbreak, you're going to find the most severe cases first. And now we're coming to learn that there are a lot more mildly symptomatic cases, even asymptomatic cases, people who are infected with no symptoms. And this is behaving.
Whoops. We lost you there.
Anything like ours.
Okay, so we lost you a little bit. Maybe I don't know if you have how your internet connection is there, but we lost you for a second there. So let's go back. Let's talk a little bit about SARS, because so do we know where the virus came from? Let's start with that. Is it animal transmitted? Was it from seafood? I mean, there are a lot of conspiracy theories out there. I'm sure you're probably familiar with them. There's one that they stole it from the Chinese stole the virus from Canada. There's one that it comes from a lab in Wuhan province that does biological warfare. Say a little bit about what we know about where the virus comes from and where this class of viruses come from and how it appears in humans.
So all the coronaviruses circulate in bats. That's the home for these coronaviruses. And what can happen is bats can spill that virus into other animals. So that happened during SARS when it spilled into civet cats, which then were consumed, and that started the outbreak. So we know that this came from an animal. We don't know which animal, but ultimately came from bats. And that's where this virus originated. But then it had the capacity to spread between humans. So right now, it's not being spread because of animal to human. It's all human to human right now. So it's become less important from a public health standpoint to understand which animal it came from, but more it's a virological curiosity trying to understand where it came from. And now this is spreading efficiently from human to human. And it's no surprise that it came from bats in an animal, because that's what coronaviruses do. That's what happened with SARS, and Middle East respiratory syndrome as well went from bats to camels. And that's also causing an outbreak in the Arabian Peninsula currently.
Oh. So what happened with SARS? So, I mean, I vaguely remember there was a lot of panic. There was a lot of stress. As you said, the Chinese tried to cover it up. And then I think once people discovered that, there was a lot of panic about it. How dangerous was SARS, and then how was it brought under control in the end?
So SARS infected about 8,000 people in several different countries, mostly in Asia and then in Canada. It killed about 800 people, so it had about a 10% case fatality rate. There were a handful of cases in the United States in the single digits. But what was significant about SARS was this is the first time we saw a coronavirus do this. And it got people very nervous about what coronaviruses could do. And it was really the actions that governments took in terms of travel restrictions, trade bans, that actually magnified the impact of this virus. Because they say, tens of billions of dollars of losses, and airports are barren and empty. And it was really a virus that only killed 800 people. And after SARS, that's when this whole WHO governance type of thing came about with the international health regulations, because they were so worried about countries taking the wrong actions in response to an outbreak, including travel bans and economic restrictions, that it would make the outbreak much worse. And that's why the WHO has come out against travel bans. But SARS was really a human factor outbreak. It was and it spread mostly because people, first the animal exposure, and then it relied on healthcare workers where there wasn't proper infection control in certain hospitals. And then this phenomenon called super spreaders, people who were kind of like typhoid Mary types, who spread it more disproportionately to people. And that's how SARS spread. And once we understood how to treat it in the hospital safely, and we understood this idea that there are certain people that are super spreaders, we were able to control it pretty quickly. And it basically went away after people stopped consuming that animal, and it's basically vanished from the earth for the most part.
So why do you say the travel bans made it worse? I mean, clearly they would make it worse economically, but did they not help to contain it geographically?
No, because if you have a respiratory virus that can be spread from person to person, it's going to have a spectrum of illness. There are going to be people that have mild illness. Some people are going to be incubating this virus, and the travel bans are not going to capture those people. And what it's going to end up doing is diverting the resources of public health authorities to dealing with travel screening, travel ban, monitoring those people, rather than actually fortifying your healthcare system in order to get ready for these types of outbreaks occurring in your country. It also makes it much harder to get resources into those countries, because now you've made it logistically very difficult to get into the outbreak zone. And then it creates stigmatization, and then it causes more economic losses to that country, which makes it even harder for that to fight. So there are not really any good criteria for when a travel ban actually works. And it's basically been a debunked type of thing. And we have this conversation with every outbreak: Ebola, H1N1, Zika, all of these things. And all the public health and infectious disease authorities all say this has all been disproven long, long ago. But every time politicians jump to it, because it's the easiest thing for them to do to satisfy people who think this is them doing something. So they're going to be tough, and it ends up backfiring usually.
So so tell us a little bit about, the danger of this coronavirus. How deadly is it? Who's actually dying from it? I've heard that pretty much only old people are actually dying, or young people, I guess, people with challenged immune systems, that it's not as deadly as maybe some are claiming. And how easily is it transmitted?
So the severity was a big question, and that's what drove all the panic, because we didn't know. We were hearing about the sickest cases first. And as we learn more, we're seeing that this case fatality rate is dropping. Now, if you try to do the raw calculation based on Chinese numbers that are being released by their health department, you get about a 2%. But that doesn't account for the fact that they're not testing people who aren't needing hospitalization. So there is a big denominator that we're missing. In all the cases outside of China, none of them have been fatal. All the cases in the United States are mild. So I do think you're going to see this case fatality rate drop much lower than 1%. And this is going to be basically clustered in those who are elderly, those who have other medical conditions. And I think it's going to be a burden for hospitals and healthcare systems to deal with the cases because they're going to get inundated with a lot of cases coming in, just like we do in flu season. But I don't think this is going to be it's going to probably be it will qualify as a pandemic, but it's not going to be a very severe pandemic because the fatality rate is much less than what we're seeing now. And we'll get a picture of that in more time. I do think that it is transmitting efficiently from human to human. We are seeing some cases. We have one case of human to human transmission in the United States from a wife to a husband. And we have seen in other European countries, this has occurred, predominantly a pretty interesting case in Germany where a traveler infected several people kind of in a business setting. So it does seem to be transmitting more efficiently than SARS did. And you have to, this actually makes sense because coronaviruses are very prolific. They cause 1/4 of our common cold. So that virus is adapted in many cases to human transmission.
So it sounds like there's nothing really overly scary here that, people, I mean, so I read somewhere people die of regular flu at, numbers far greater than what is happening with the coronavirus. And yet people are panicking. Is there any, and politicians in particular, is there any justification?
In the very beginning stages, before we knew what was going on, I do think that quick scrutiny of what was going on and really putting resources forward made sense. I think as we get further out, there's going to be a time where we have to say, we're going to have to stop this containment type of issue and just be mitigating the consequences that we're going to have. This is going to come to many countries in the world, and we're going to have cases, and some of them are going to be severe, but most of them are going to be mild, and we're going to have to deal with it. And I think it's important that we get healthcare systems ready for that. We start thinking about vaccine development, antiviral development, because that's all important to do regardless of what's going on. But I do think that that there was an appropriate reaction because it was a novel coronavirus in the history of SARS and the history of MERS. But now I think we have to begin to think about where this is going to fit in terms of risk stratification and how we kind of wind down some of the emergency stuff that's going on.
Do you think China overreacted?
Not in the beginning. I don't think they overreacted because I think that it's anytime you have a novel coronavirus, you have to set the alarm bells off because of SARS and MERS. I do think that they're quarantining of 50 million people. That was never warranted. And that actually probably made it worse because they announced that they were going to do it and 5 million people left before they did that, which actually is a way to spread it around. And I think it's the Chinese government has these levels of bureaucracy and everybody trying to not be blamed for something bad happens. So their bias is to take a strong action versus a not strong action based on what happened in SARS and based on the fact that their head of state has been calling this a major priority and anything that they were going to put people on the wall of shame if they did anything wrong. So that really set the incentives the wrong way to do this with armed guards at train stations and really made it worse, I think, with shortages, for example, that have occurred in Wuhan.
Somebody's Upton's asking, would it be fatal in developed countries where more can be spent to prevent, identify cases quickly and treat victims? I mean, how many fatalities do you really expect in kind of more developed countries?
I think it will be very minimal. It will be much less than 1% of cases.
Okay.
And I think you'll probably get that even in China once we actually figure out the denominator.
Is there an issue with kind of China's live animal food markets that makes them kind of the source of many of these viruses? And is there anything the Chinese government should or could do about that?
So many of our infectious diseases jump from animals, and the closer contact you have with animals and more of them, the more likely this is to happen. So we definitely know that live markets are a source of many sources of viruses that could actually come into humans. Many of them don't have the capacity to do that, but that's a place where you can see this interaction or what we call viral chatter between humans and
Whoops, you lost you there again. Amesh?
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry, guys. He's obviously got okay, try that again.
So live markets are definitely a place where animals and humans interact. And in those places are where viruses can find opportunities to jump into humans. And it is something that we've always tracked and looked at and wondered is a big place for emerging infectious diseases to appear. The Chinese government has been scrutinizing them. They closed them down. They've cleaned them out, trying to increase the better practices there. But I think it's something that's really culturally that they are very interested in keeping because they want fresh food. They like to go to the market and have the animal slaughtered there. So it's a very hard thing to change. We learned this in Ebola. It's very hard to change cultural mores. And even if they know that there's this risk. But that's why China has always been on the top of lists for places where pandemic viruses can emerge because of the live markets.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever told you the story of going to a restaurant in Guilin, China. This is probably 2004, 2005. And my wife and I are in Guilin, China, which is a tourist area, but a tourist area mostly for Chinese. So there are very few American tourists, and so they don't speak much English or at all. And we go into a restaurant. Of course, there are no menus in English. There are no knives and forks. So we're trying to communicate what we want to eat. And finally, I think I drew a fish on the tablecloth, and they figured, okay, fish is good. So she literally says, okay, come with me. I go, what? She takes me outside the restaurant. And outside the restaurant, there's this niche by the pavement. And in the niche, there's a big aquarium with fish. And next to the aquarium with fish, there's a cage with rabbits and a thing with turtles and all kind of animals laid out there, live animals just there. And she takes a net, she puts it into the aquarium. She says, "This fish," and I pick a fish, and then she flings it over her shoulder, slams it into the pavement, kills the fish right there on the pavement. And then somebody from the kitchen comes out and takes it back and cooks it. And I go back to the table, and my wife says, "I'm so glad you didn't pick the rabbit," because who knows how they would have killed it right there. But yeah, I mean, part of it is poor countries, and much of China is still very poor, where they can't refrigerate and they can't keep things fresh. They still serve live animals and live fish and live, and they have these live markets, primarily because of the cost of refrigeration. And that's true.
There's stories about the Walmarts or the Walmart equivalents there that are not getting customers. They don't get customers to buy food there. People prefer fresh food.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't we all if it was safe? I mean, I think fresh food is probably marginally better in terms of taste, but far less convenient, obviously. So, what happened? What makes, let's say, the Spanish flu, these real pandemics where thousands of people die, or tens of thousands of people die? What makes those possible? To what extent are we at risk of something like that, of a real pandemic that affects all of our lives, that, kind of like the horror movies that we see all the time, kind of the catastrophe, and how much of it is kind of overblown and a media's tendency towards, portraying the negative and towards kind of raising hysteria levels?
And the media is always going to portray things worse than they actually are, but we do face pandemic risks that are kind of unique in 2020 versus even 1918. We have an interconnected world, and before, viruses and bacteria traveled at the speed of a steamliner. Now they travel at the speed of a jet, so they can get from one side of the world to the other side of the world very quickly. We also have multiple megacities all over the world where there is crowding, poor conditions, maybe minimal sanitation in certain areas that allow the opportunity for viruses to spread in big cities. And people are worried about this coronavirus spreading in places, in megacities in Africa, and how that would be. So those two factors do make us at higher risk for pandemics, but we do also have a better healthcare system. We've discovered lots of things about medicine. We have sophisticated ICUs. We've got antibiotics, antivirals, vaccine development. So there's kind of competing factors with pandemic risk. But I do think when you're on a planet that's dominated by microorganisms, it's only a matter of time before another pandemic to happen. And the Spanish flu was probably the worst that we've had in history, with probably 100 million people killed. And that was because it was a novel virus. It was a novel flu virus, and it happened at the
Whoops, we lost you there again.
You had lots of people moving all over the world. I don't know why that's happening.
Yeah, it happened again.
Am I there?
Last I heard, it was a novel virus.
Yeah, so 1918 was a novel virus that really took advantage of the fact that there were massive troop movements going on after the end of World War I. And we had no antivirals, no antibiotics for secondary bacterial infection. We didn't even know flu was caused by a virus at that time. But that is really the paradigm pandemic that we worry about happening. And there are flu viruses that are very scary. Actually, in China, bird flu viruses that people think about could be the next type of 1918 if they develop the ability to transmit between humans efficiently.
So if you live in a developed country like the United States, to what extent should people be worried? I mean, clearly, if you live in Africa, if you live in parts of Asia, I mean, where the facilities, the medicines, the people's, the hygiene, everything else is limited, hundreds of millions of people could die. But do you think people in the developed world, is it a real concern?
I do think that any kind of pandemic could be disruptive to any country in the world. The deaths are definitely going to be clustered in places that are resource poor, but I do think even a mild pandemic would be a hit to the United States in terms of disrupting life, causing hospitals to really be inundated with patients. Hospitals mostly run at almost capacity now, and even a bad flu season can put people in the parking lot getting treated. So I do think there's not much redundancy and resiliency in some of our healthcare systems, even in the United States. I think that we have to be alert to pandemics. I think it should be thought of as a risk that we have to face and prepare for and think about. I don't think that means that everybody should be storing soup cans in their basement and waiting for the Armageddon to occur. But I do think, at least from a public health preparedness standpoint and an infectious disease preparedness, that it's an important thing that experts actually devote time to thinking about and preparing for in case they do happen.
Somebody in the super chat asked, do new viruses tend to come from particular regions of Earth? Have any major viruses originated from the West in recent history?
Well, the 2009 H1N1 pandemic originated from Mexico, which totally changed the whole paradigm. Everybody thought the new flu pandemic virus would come from China, but it came from Mexico. So they can come from different places. It's not necessarily that it's only one part. There are certain hotspots in the world, but any virus can emerge anywhere. And it's important that we don't be completely geographically restricted, because we can be surprised, and like we were with 2009 H1N1.
And you said there's a virus now in the Middle East, something about camels? Yeah,
MiddleEast Respiratory Syndrome, which is another novel coronavirus discovered in 2012 in Saudi Arabia and in Jordan. This spreads from bats to camels to humans, but it hasn't been able to spread efficiently between humans. We've got some healthcare associated clusters and some family clusters, but it's not spreading in the community. It has a 35% mortality rate, so it's very different than this coronavirus, but it's one to keep an eye on, because it is still accruing cases even now as we speak in the Arabian Peninsula.
So you think the travel bans that the Trump administration has imposed are ill-advised and wrong, and just, much more focused on kind of showing that we're doing something rather than actually being effective? What should the United States government in this case be doing? What is the role of government in situations like this?
I think it's to think about how this impacts national security and to worry about contagion and spread and how this might disrupt civil society. Right now, we have government systems that help healthcare facilities prepare for these types of emergencies when they rise to the level of national security. And what we're seeing is the government trying to get our healthcare facilities ready. In our current system, the government has a big role in drug development and vaccine development. So they're already ramping all of that stuff up. They're putting resources into our health departments that can help with monitoring people and communicating to the public about what to do. I mean, a lot of these things are a result of what the government has done in pandemics for quite some time. And I think that when you talk about the quarantines that they're doing, for example, in California, they don't really seem warranted. I think it's also the one thing that is important is when travelers come in, to actually tell them about this risk in case they get sick afterwards. I don't think you need to isolate, you don't need to quarantine them or do anything to them, but just they need to know who to call so that they don't contaminate other people if they walk into the emergency department. Those types of activities, I think, are the best things to do. I think the travel ban will unlikely impact this virus. I think that it's likely already spreading in many countries with mild cases that just are being mixed in with flu cases, and they're not being recognized, and we'll only learn that in retrospect. So it's use of resources, and it's going to actually take away from other resources that are more important.
Okay. So one last question. What are kind of the symptoms if somebody does have the virus? What are kind of symptoms that should alert somebody to go see a doctor or to look into it more?
So this is the hard part, because the symptoms are identical to the flu or the common cold. So you're going to get a cough, fever, chills, sore throat. You may be short of breath. And I think once you're short of breath, I think that's short of breath and coughing is something that you might want to see a doctor for and alert them that you've been to places where this is. But remember, we're still in the middle of flu season. So you're still more likely as an American to have the influenza than you are to have this coronavirus. So it's important to keep that risk perspective and not think that you just jump to that novel coronavirus and not think that you have influenza.
Okay, Jennifer has one more question. As people get cleaner and eat better in different parts of the world, I guess, does this make for better resistance to any new virus?
It does. I think that nutrition plays a big role. That's why we see large deaths from diarrheal illness or measles in Africa and less so in the developed world. So it definitely, nutrition is important for your immune system to be at its peak.
And then Upton asks, what do you think of the mobile game Plague Inc.? It claims to accurately simulate pandemics. I don't know if you know anything about that.
I don't know that one specifically. I've played a couple, and I played the game Pandemic. It's a board game, but I think they're fun. I don't know that I don't know how accurate they are, but I think they're fun.
Okay, great. Thanks, Amesh. It's always great to talk to you because you bring a level of objectivity to these things that is rare in our culture. So I appreciate it. Thanks for the work you're doing to just generally to calm people down and to bring some rationality and objectivity, I guess, to the whole world of infectious diseases. So really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Sure, anytime. All right. That was great, I think. Somebody asked, is he an objectivist? Yes, he is an objectivist. You can tell by the way he addresses the issues, I think. Okay, so I have a bunch of Super Chat questions that I want to go through. If I don't get to the to my review of Joker and Witcher, then I will do that. I will do that in tomorrow's show. I will be on again tomorrow at some point. So if I don't get to them, so let's do these quickly. Somebody's asking for classical music from meditations earlier mentioned. I'm not sure what that exactly refers to, but I have argued that classical music can help you simulate what I think meditation does. As somebody who doesn't really meditate, I don't know, but I think this is my equivalent of meditation. And what I recommend is putting on pretty much, a lot of the start with a well-known 19th century classical music pieces from anywhere from Beethoven to Rachmaninoff, through Brahms and Schubert and Schumann and Tchaikovsky, of course, and basically put them on. Start with the ones that are more well-known. They're well-known for a reason. Chopin, somebody says, of course. Start with the ones that are more well-known. They're well-known for a reason. They're well-known because they're good. They're well-known because they actually have this emotional impact on people. Darken the room, crank up the volume to 11, and just let the music envelop you. Try to focus on the music. Try not to let your mind drift. But you can use this on almost every piece of classical music. I think it all works. Some of Mozart's pieces are pretty good. Christopher recommends Mozart's Piano Concerto number 21, which is one of his best, and it's a fabulous piece and definitely recommend it. Generally, piano concertos, violin concertos from that period are all going to be easier for a beginner in particular to listen to than I would say a symphony. Don't overdo it, particularly when you're starting out. If you see your mind drifting and you can't focus, then stop. Do it in small bits until you get to the point where you can listen to a whole concerto for 40 minutes or the whole symphony for up to an hour, even longer, some symphonies. Somebody mentions Piano Concerto number 22 by Mozart. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, both of those are fantastic. Mozart is not one of my all-time favorites, although I do love Mozart. I'm much more of a romantic in the sense of Beethoven and on. So you've got a bunch of masterpieces there. Somebody mentions the Cello Sonata number 3 by Beethoven. You've got Tchaikovsky's trios. You've got symphonies. Anything like that is just try it out and just play around and just try different pieces, right? So I don't have a list right now of things I would recommend, but don't do it while you're doing house chores. Somebody recommends doing it while you're doing house chores. No, that you're not going to get that meditative state. You're not going to get that condition where you really, 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 get that emotional connection with the music, that full experience of art. To do that, you have to be single-mindedly focused on the music. If you want to do house chores while listening to classical music, put on a piece you've never listened to before. Use it as a means to get used to the music, because particularly new music, particularly more complex music. But then don't rob yourself of the opportunity then to, to have this all engrossing, focused experience of with the music, where the room is dark, the volume is high, and your 100% of your focus is on the piece itself. Somebody recommends a movie, The 100-Foot Journey, which is on Netflix. Don't know anything about it. I'll have to try it out. Let's see, more super chat questions. Snyder family were vocal founding members of ARI. It wasn't Snyder family. It was Ed Snyder. It was the founder of the Snyder family, if you will. Ed Snyder was the founder of ARI, certainly a co-founder of ARI. He was the one who kind of dragged our intellectuals kicking and streaming to found the Institute, but him, once he convinced Leonard Peikoff, he and Leonard Peikoff were the ones who founded the Ayn Rand Institute. So the question is, does the family still support objectivism in any way? Let me just say yes. I don't want to say more than that, because it's private, and it's better to ask the family whether they support objectivism, but they support ARI through their foundation, and I don't think that's a secret. And they're very supportive of objectivism and ARI. So yes, the answer is yes, and the relationship between ARI and the family's foundation is very positive. I feel you used a new term that made perfect sense in Bronze Age perverts to describe the so-called Judeo-Christian value, nonsense and identity politics. Why does Dennis Prager corral and act as a sycophant for people like that? So I don't know what new term I used. So I'm not sure. The question doesn't really make sense to me. I apologize. But let me just say that Dennis Prager is Dennis Prager. Dennis Prager is an advocate for a Judeo-Christian moral tradition. He is an advocate for the important role of religion in human life and in politics and in everything else. So I think he is what he is. And when he sees allies, including allies who are that in some respect are anti the current system and have nihilistic elements, but who will buy into it, right? Buy into a certain aspect of his vision, then he supports them. Right now, for example, there's a coalition of pro-Trump supporters, and that coalition includes these nuts like the Bronze Age pervert kind of, nihilists with the kind of traditionalist conservatives of Dennis Prager. And that is a coalition centered around the value of Donald Trump. And I could say a lot more about that, but I'm not going to, because quick questions here. What do you think of Jared Kushner? I'm not a big fan of Jared Kushner. I don't know what he stands for. I don't know what he believes. I don't know what he thinks. There's again, the Israeli peace plan that was just released I'm not a fan of it. I'm not you can listen to the beginning of the show if you want to understand my views on the Israeli-Palestinian plan. I think it's ill-conceived. I think Jared Kushner is very conventional. I'm just not impressed. Dave Rubin has slowly been moving away from atheism and recently stated that he isn't an atheist anymore. It sounds as if he attributes this to his time with Jordan Peterson. What are your thoughts? I mean, I saw that. It's hard for me to tell. I need to actually have a sit down with Dave Rubin and ask him and let him explain it to me, what he exactly meant by that. But yes, I think this is the problem. The problem is that people need morality. They understand that they need morality, and they need a framework for understanding conceptual knowledge. So they need a grounding, an epistemological grounding. And many atheists, and I think this was the case with Dave Rubin and others, don't have that. They don't have a good sense of where morality comes from, and they don't have a good understanding of where kind of knowledge comes from, how we know, kind of epistemology. And I think at the end of the day, they have two choices. They can be, three choices. They become cynics and skeptics, which I think many become, and I think Dave Rubin wants to avoid. They can, they can be seduced, and I think it is being seduced by Jordan Peterson's conventional, seemingly rational, but kind of really floating explanations which link it up to kind of a soft religion where you don't have to accept the baggage of religion. You don't have to accept the Bible and kind of accept the 10 Commandments as the moral foundations, but not really, because the way Jordan interprets them is very psychological. And he comes across as, and then the same with its theory of knowledge, so it's very seductive for many atheists. And the third alternative is Ayn Rand. Now, I was hoping that Dave would kind of embrace Ayn Rand. And it's interesting that in other shows, he has said, when he's with objectivists, that he agrees with objectivism. I don't know how much he can agree with objectivism, because I don't know how much he has fully studied it and really gained a deep understanding of what is meant by the objectivist moral theory, and why the objectivist moral theory rejects any attempt at a moral theory that comes from so-called God, or whatever Jordan Peterson derives as, from categorical imperatives, which is the equivalent of that, or, and even more substantially, I don't think Dave has dived into the epistemology, where he would get a sense of what knowledge looks like. And again, I think Jordan Peterson is very, very seductive, is very, very appealing. And he's not offensive. He's offensive to some people, but he's very conventional in terms of the mainstream way of thinking about the world, including about religion and about morality and about where knowledge comes from. He's not really challenging the foundational questions, the foundational issues. I guess I said, did you see that Joe Rogan endorsed Sanders? No, I didn't see that. Wow. Really? Joe Rogan endorsed Sanders? Okay, I'll have to look at that. Wow. If you remember, I did commentary on the Joe Rogan interview of Sanders, and he was supportive of pretty much everything Sanders said. So it doesn't shock me. It does surprise me, because I thought he would go with somebody like Andrew Yang, who's not quite as radical and more kind of vibe-wise, more fitting to Joe Rogan. But all right, interesting. I'll look into that. Why is eugenics a false idea? It's a false idea because it's a collectivistic idea. Because it instead of studying the individual and studying human nature qua individuals, it is trying to study collectives, and study collectives in not, in a sense of, in a useful, helpful sense, in a sense that, for example, could help health-wise or could help understand, but in a sense of, certain cognitive destiny, not just physical attributes. So eugenics is a false idea because it tries to attribute to the individual values that are associated with a group. And values are chosen. Values are a question of free will. Values are up to the individual. And any attempt to attribute values, character, morality, ideas to an individual because he belongs to a particular group is just plain collectivism and racism. And it's just plain false, because values, ideas, the content of cognition is chosen. It's not a product of your particular genetic makeup, and it's certainly not a product of your particular genetic makeup as correlated with other people who have similar genetic makeup. So the whole field of eugenics is bogus in that it's trying to attribute ideas, cognitive inclinations to your participation in a particular, your membership, in quotes, in a particular group. In the past, you've expressed affection for the films of Akira Kurosawa. Can you reflect on the altruistic themes of his films, like Seven Samurais? How do you view that film as an objectivist? So yes, I'm a big fan of Akira Kurosawa's movies. And let me just say, first, I'm a fan of many movies that have bad philosophical themes. That is, I don't judge a movie based on its philosophy. I judge a movie based on how effective the movie is in conveying the theme that movie is set out to convey, and whether I find it entertaining and enjoyable and stimulating and thoughtful. So that said, so Akira Kurosawa, I think, does that. If you watch a movie like Ran if you watch a movie like Kagemusha, which are two of my favorite Akira Kurosawa movies. Kagemusha, less known. Ran is King Lear interpretation, Japanese interpretation, of Kurosawa interpretation of King Lear. They're both, engaging, beautiful, stimulating, thought-provoking movies that deal with ideas, that deal with values, wrong ideas. I mean, and this is the case, for example, with Shakespeare. Shakespeare is terrible philosophically. His philosophical themes are awful. And yet, wow, amazing language, amazing stories, amazing drama, amazing, incredibly thought-provoking. So I love Shakespeare. I love going to see Shakespeare plays for those reasons. Now, I don't consider Seven Samurai an altruistic movie. I don't consider people fighting for justice altruism, even if the injustice is not committed against them at that particular moment. There are people that understand. There are people that understand that an injustice in the world out there affects them. That if you let bad people get away with stuff, at the end of the day, the bad people will come after you as well. And fighting bad people is a value in and of itself, particularly in a culture in which you, as a samurai in this case, that is your job, in a sense, is to fight bad people. And that is what you've trained yourself to do. That is what you're responsible for. That is where you get your self-esteem from, because that is the career you have chosen. And here are people who cannot fight for themselves. They are basically allowing gangsters to run rampant. The police, if you will, the officials of the state are not helping them out. And if you can help them out, if you have the skills, the ability, the inclination, the profession, the focus to help them out, then you should. Now, again, it's not a commandment. You have to evaluate it in the context of your own life, and each one of the seven samurais in the seven samurais chooses to do so for his own reasons. But it's not necessarily altruistic. They're not necessarily giving their life up for the villages. They're giving their life up for the principle of justice. They're giving their life up, or they're risking their lives in this case, for the principle of defeating evil and defeating bad. If you see people, I don't know, what was the Equalizer, which is a movie with, I forget his name now, one of my favorite actors, one of my favorite modern actors, where he goes out and crushes the bad guys. It has some impact on him because he encounters people that unjust things are happening to them. And then he goes, Denzel Washington is the actor, the Equalizer, which I really enjoyed both Equalizer movies. They're good action movies, but the principle is he's fighting for justice. And he has the skill, the ability. This is what he's trained for. This is his career. And he can't stand by when unjust things are happening. Now, most of us can't barely defend ourselves, never mind defending villages in a remote place, or never mind defending neighbors and going out and going up against, organized crime. So it would be a sacrifice for us to do it because there's no way for us to succeed. But I would fund somebody to do it who had the capability and the ability to do it. So I would be willing to give up money to do it. And that person who was able and competent to do it, for example, Denzel Washington in The Equalizer, is not doing it out of a sense of altruism. So you have to be careful in what you attribute altruism to. Soldiers fighting for freedom are not being altruistic. Freedom is a value to them. Justice is a value to the samurais. Justice is a value to Denzel Washington. And that is what he's fighting for. So you have to be careful in evaluating movies or in evaluating other people's actions. Movies should not be judged only by their philosophical theme. But even there, you have to be careful in analyzing and diagnosing what the philosophical theme really is. All right. Is Silicon Valley being left unregulated because of Ayn Rand's influence on the culture? Well, to some extent, but it's not being left unregulated anymore. There's a lot of regulations in Silicon Valley. They've been increasing in the last 30 years. And there's a push now by the Trump administration, and I think by future administrations, to break up big tech, to regulate it, to control it. So you're going to see much, much more regulation. But yes, I think Ayn Rand's influence, plus the influence of people like Milton Friedman on the culture, has been to basically, in certain areas, leave markets alone, leave individuals alone to produce and create and so on. That has dissipated, unfortunately. The statists have come to realize the importance of Silicon Valley, and they're getting their claws into it. And unfortunately, this generation of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs is doing little to nothing to defend themselves against this. Maybe they've been encouraging it, if you see Zuckerberg sometimes talking about it. Not caring about other people strikes me as callous and ugly trait. Am I wrong? Well, not caring about which people? I mean, I hate these generalizations, right? I mean, there's certain people I don't care about. There's certain people I do care about. There's certain people I care a lot about. So yes, I think generally, if you don't care about anybody else but you, in kind of a sense, that's callous, stupid, irrational, because your life very much relies, your success in life relies on other people producing, creating, building, and then you trading with them. That the best relationship to have with other people as a human being is a trader relationship. And as such, you know, it is wrong not to care about them, because it's important that they are successful, free, prosperous, productive, so that you can then be also productive, successful, and so on, right? So it's a you know, I think it's a caricature of objectivism to say that objectivism doesn't care about other people. I mean, look how much time I spent trying to educate other people. Think how much time Ayn Rand spent on trying to educate other people, or Leonard Peacock. So absolutely, we care about other people. We care about other people because they're enormous value. Life is an enormous value. Human life is an enormous value. And once you realize the potential of human beings to bring happiness, prosperity, wealth to me, of course I care about other people. But then there's some people I don't care about because they're bad and they hurt me, or they could be bad, or they're on a bad path. So it's not unconditional caring. Will Europe collapse into dictatorship before the US, or will it happen simultaneously? I don't know. It's so hard to tell. I think Europe is going to fragment. Some places are already slipping into dictatorship. Authoritarianism, certainly a place like Hungary. Poland is heading in that direction. But it's really hard to tell. I think authoritarianism, authoritarian attitude is rising in America. Because America is one place, it could happen very quickly here. Probably not in the next 20 years, but we're sliding towards it over the next 20 years, unless something significant happens to reverse that trend. All right, God, is getting a happy ending from a massage immoral? I mean, my view of that is it depends. It depends why you're doing it, how often you do it, how you know, is it serving as an escape from reality? Is it serving as an escape from sex, from a relationship, from something that is meaningful? Are you using it as a means to escape, to try to live a fantasy without acting to actually achieve your values out there? So, you know, infrequently you have a massage, you know, but if this becomes a substitute for, I mean, I think it's much more similar to masturbation than it is to full sex. Usually, I don't know the extent to which you're getting a happy ending, but I think it's what kind, but it's so I don't think it's quite like going to a prostitute, something in between. But I think it really is. It really does depend on what need this is fulfilling for you, and whether you're using it to escape reality, to escape relationship, to escape having real sex with a real person that you really, really value. And if you are, then it's clearly immoral. So a lot of it has to do with your motivation for it. It's somebody said it's not good for your self-esteem. That's right. It's not good for your self-esteem. You're paying somebody to stimulate something that you should be gaining through a different kind of trade. It's a different kind of set of values. But it's also not the most horrible thing you could do in the world. And in particular, if you don't obsess about it, and if you don't let it substitute for you actually going out there and finding a relationship and cultivating a relationship and cultivating yourself to be worthy of a relationship. And I mean, that's the focus for both men and women should be: make yourself the best that you can be. Go out there and try to find people who you can love, who you can have a proper values-based sexual relationship and ultimately a intimate relationship with, that includes sex and you know, but the focus needs to be first on making yourself the best. And I think a lot of people who escape intimacy, who escape sex, real values-based sex, what I call values-based sex, it's because they don't value themselves. It's a lack of self-esteem. It's an escape. It's and so on. And I think that's what usually happens. Okay. Whew, all right. It's we've done an hour, 20 minutes. That's good. I will. I'm going to do a show tomorrow. I apologize. I don't have the time. I'll tweet about it in advance tomorrow once I know exactly. I think I'm going to try to go to the beach tomorrow. Relax a little bit, but I'll also try to do a show. And so I will let you know about that. I will do the Joker and Witcher reviews then instead of now, because I just don't have time. And I want to spend a little time on Joker because I think it's an important movie. I'm not going to recommend going to see it, but I think it's an important movie and a well-made movie. All right. Thanks, everybody. And I appreciate it. Should the U.S. restrict movement for infection? I think I suggest you go back and listen to my discussion with Amesh about that. I mean, he is an expert, and he said no. His recommendation is that they should not, that it actually works against the purpose of dealing with this. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon. Have a great rest of your weekend. Don't forget to like, thumbs up the show, to share the show, and to support the show. YaronBrookShow.com/support. Thanks, everybody. Bye. Have a great weekend.